So, once again, my name is Graham Lawler, and I am the founder of Ultralight Startups. Welcome to the May 2010 meeting for mobile startups. This is our first meeting that we're going to cover mobile applications in our 2-year history. And it's high time that we did that because mobile is a super hot space and lots of exciting things going on that we're going to hear about tonight. So I'm going to start off by introducing the panel, and then I'm going to give them a chance to talk about some of their favorite mobile app startups, and we're going to discuss how to create and monetize your mobile app and profit from it. So we'll start with the far end. Nihil Mehta is CEO and co-founder of Buzzed, a venture-backed social city guide on the iPhone, BlackBerry, and Android. Prior to Buzzed, Nihal founded Ipsh, one of the first full-service mobile marketing agencies in 2001, which he sold to Omnicom in 2005, and Urban Groove, an online nightlife portal. Nihal is also co-chairing the Innovation Advisory Board for Reshma for Congress, co-founded the nonprofit Project
Ahimsa.
Yeah. Project Ahimsa.
A lot of hard words to pronounce.
Thank you. And co-founded the mobile seed venture ENIAC. So welcome, Nihal. So Alex is next. It's a good time to remind you if you have a mobile device on you, it's a good time to silence it. Alex Muller is CEO and co-founder of GP Shopper, a mobile marketing company that helps consumers connect with local retail stores. GP Shopper builds applications for clients including Best Buy, Nikon, LG, and also markets its own applications, including Slifter, a local shopping application with over 2 billion local product listings. GP Shopper is funded by Allen & Co., and since 2005 has built mobile applications for platforms including iPhone, Android, BlackBerry, J2ME, and Brew. Prior to GP Shopper, Alex founded and sold Evolve Living, an environmental software company. So, serial entrepreneur. Rachit Sukla is CEO and co-founder of Two Toasters, a mobile development agency that merges expert mobile strategy with focused development to shepherd an app from idea all the way to App Store. Two Toasters' work includes iPhone, iPad, Android, and BlackBerry, and has been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN, and recently in an Apple iPhone commercial. Previously, Rachit founded a number of startups, including IdeaBon, an idea management platform. And last, Greg Yardley. Greg is founder and vice president of products ad optimization at Flurry, a provider of analytics, deployment, monetization tools for mobile application developers. Before Pinch Media merged with Flurry in December 2009, Greg was Pinch's co-founder and CEO. Prior to Pinch Media, Greg led product management and next-generation ad-serving platforms at Yahoo and Right Media, and held product management positions at Root Markets and Nextag. So in recruiting this panel, I had a couple of very specific requirements, and I found that I had actually talked to more people in recruiting this panel than I have certainly for any other panel, and probably altogether of all the panels that I've run this year. The requirements that I wanted were people that had done stuff on all three major smartphone platforms, iPhone, Android, and BlackBerry. There's a lot of iPhone developers you can find. That seems to be very common in New York. The BlackBerry people that I could find largely were based in Toronto, which is where RIM and BlackBerry is based, and there's a whole ecosystem around that. And Android, it seemed like, was just ramping up, and it was difficult to find people that had experience on Android as a platform. So we're very thrilled to have people that have done stuff on all three of those platforms, and also that are founders and CEOs. So that's something we look for as well. So we're thrilled to have this panel. And I wanted to cover 3 topics here. One is revenue models, like what are the viable revenue models for a mobile app. 2 is marketing, and how do you market a mobile app and distinguish yourself from the hundreds of thousands of other mobile apps that are on any platform that you're going to deploy on. And 3 is building. So if you've got an idea and you're convinced it's going to make money and you're going to market it, how do you go about building it, and what's different from building a mobile app versus a website, should we say. So those are the 3 kind of themes that we're going to touch on here. And I thought I would start by having these guys describe some mobile apps that they are familiar with that have had commercial success. So I think, who is it? Ratchet is going to talk about Red Laser and Smule.
Right. So
And try and speak into the microphone to the extent that you can. I'm sorry we don't have more than 2 microphones.
So Red Laser was it's a product by this company called Occipital. Those guys are they started out in Techstars, which is an incubator in Boulder, Colorado. So they got the 15K from Techstars. They ended up burning through the entire 15K with no product, and then they decided, well, shit, what are we gonna do? So they released a couple iPhone apps, which allowed them to sort of bootstrap themselves. And at that time, what they noticed was there was no barcode scanning app in the iTunes store. So they had the pretty technically savvy team, just the 2 co-founders. They cranked this out within 2 weeks and launched the first version of Red Laser, which to date has gotten over 1 million downloads. And when it launched, it was $1.99, and then they bumped it down to 99 cents. So obviously they made a decent chunk of change, which has allowed them to kind of continue funding their other iPhone applications. And the other thing that I found that was really interesting is they've licensed their API, so which allows other apps to use their API to integrate the barcode scanning, which makes it really easy for other applications that are trying to go into the retail space to be able to use their core technology without having to kind of incur a lot of technology debt.
Cool. And Smule, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, Smule, those guys, lucky for them, they're Apple's sweetheart company, and they've been featured in a lot of at least 1 or 2 keynotes that I can remember. But for them, the interesting takeaway there is that they focus on a very sort of niche play, which is musical apps, and they have a tremendous amount of talented people that work for them. A lot of them have PhDs and are musicologists, and what they've started to do is they've had success building their own products. Now they're moving to branded products. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with the show Glee, and so they just released a Glee app for iPhone, iPad, and iPod Touch, and which essentially allows people to create Glee groups and be able to essentially sing a cappella across their platform.
Cool. Okay. So Fandango, I think that was Alex. You're going to talk about that?
Yeah, sure.
So when asked what applications I like, and in these cases, I'll admit these companies aren't startups. So, don't shoot me for that part of it. But I was just thinking, particularly, one of the things that often comes to us is what makes a good mobile application. And what I find the answer to that is oftentimes nothing to do with software, but actually the context in which it's used. And so here are 2 of my favorite applications for context, Fandango and Gilt Group. That's the other one. The reason why is because it's very innovative, but also very logical. And so I don't know how many of you have a Fandango profile. Show of hands. All right. So for those of you, and I'm one of them, have you ever used their mobile apps? Yeah. One of the things you'll find is, especially if you're a New Yorker, right? The decision to go to a movie is never done at home. You're out at the restaurant. It's a little bit impulsive. And so for me, the context there is brilliant. You're out and about. Maybe you're at the soccer game with your kids, or maybe you're at the movie theaters having dinner with your wife. You can make that decision there. It gives you all the information you need. And if you have the profile, it's really once you're a registered user, it's really just a couple of clicks, and the movie ticket's bought, and it's paid for, and it's ready for you. I really like that as the m-commerce model, too, that they use. Similar thing, in my mind, can be said for this next app, which is the Gilt Group. And they also work that very well. And in this case, the context isn't that you're out and about, but more importantly, it's that this is a sample sale site that every 24 hours has different content. And so if you're a very busy person and you like this, and I'll be honest, when talking to my wife about it, she's like, favorite app right there. Because for her, she doesn't have a lot of time during the day, so it's on those off hours, whether it's walking to the office or waiting at the elevator somewhere where she can kind of sneak a peek at whatever Gilt's showing. And then if she happens to like something, it's a big enough image on the iPhone and it's an easy enough experience where those purchases are going to be made. And what I find is, once every few weeks, there's a box waiting for us downstairs at the doorman. And I like these two applications for the way they use the context in mobile and kind of facilitate your lifestyle and help you make an impulsive decision. And that's what makes them really one of my favorites.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Nihal, you're going to talk about OpenTable?
Yeah, I think, just building on what Alex said, context is really important. We were at a panel, I think, on Monday, and Albert Wenger said something that resonated. Albert Wenger is a partner at Union Square Ventures. He's on the board of a few other mobile app companies, one being Foursquare, and he mentioned what we try to do is we try to take existing consumer experiences and look at companies that just make them a little bit better. Not dramatically trying to change the way consumers do things, but making it easier to do things they're already doing. And I think the OpenTable app is testament to that, the Fandango app as well. First quarter this year, OpenTable did, I think this was in TechCrunch yesterday, close to $150 million in gross sales through mobile. Pretty amazing. I think between 1 and 2 million users actually booked tables on the OpenTable app at an average of, $50 a meal. That's how they got the number. So while mobile is only about 10% of OpenTable's revenue, it's the fastest growing. These numbers are all public because OpenTable actually is public. They filed for an IPO last year. They're doing pretty well. So that's just an example of something that consumers are already doing, right? They're already making restaurant reservations, but now they can do it on the go in the palm of their hand, search for availability based on their location, and facilitate a transaction.
Okay, excellent. Great example. So, Greg, you're going to talk about Epic Pet Wars and Tap Defense?
So for this panel, I wanted to talk about a couple of applications which I thought suited the ultralight theme. These applications, the developers behind them executed well. They got out to a strong start, and they were doing very, very well for themselves before they ever thought of raising funding or doing anything besides reaching out beyond their own resources. Epic Pet Wars is a social game on the iPhone platform. It has quite a few users. Essentially, it's Pokemon for iPhone. There's no particular art there. The execution is kind of clunky. The gameplay is not all that sophisticated. I hope the developers aren't in the audience. But if they are, I would say I admire them because they were a very metric-driven company and they focused very, very early on understanding how their app was used, iterating quickly, and then focusing on revenue. Epic Pet Wars' shtick was in-application purchases before in-application purchases existed on iPhone. They did whatever they could in order to drive that business model forward, getting people initially addicted to their game, using that game frequently, and then making purchases so that they could get a little bit more revenue, and that model worked very, very well for them. Small developer shop, Epic Pet Wars did very well, sold to Angimoco recently. Tap Defense, a little bit different. This is a tower defense game. Same sort of thing. Graphics, nothing great, kind of ugly. Their shtick was advertising. Very early on, they decided they were going to release an advertising-supported game when most games were paid. Very early on, they discovered that they were losing a lot of money because their ad network of choice couldn't fill all their ad inventory. So they were very metrics-driven. They were measuring this like you would not believe, and they actually built out their own ad mediation system so they could work with a bunch of other people. They did a number of things trying to improve revenue in their product, always being very, very revenue-focused. And eventually, they turned that into a product that they started offering to other developers. So Tap Defense did very, very well initially without having to do a raise. They did raise a little bit of money, and then they sold to OfferPal Media. I think these are great examples because the developers from the start focused on revenue, measurement, and constant iteration. I wish I could do that as well.
That's a great ultralight story. What is it that they're measuring exactly? Why are they measuring better than other mobile apps?
They were measuring usage. They were really understanding how the game was used, how long the game was used, what part of the game was used, what part of the game was not used, were there users leaving. This is what Flurry does. Neither of those applications use Flurry. They build it themselves. So I'm not up here trying to do a product pitch for Flurry. They did it on their own. But they really paid attention to gathering as much data as they can so they could understand exactly what the lifetime value of a customer was and what was working and what wasn't. And they took a very broad approach.
Excellent. Okay. So there's some context about some of the mobile apps that have done very well recently. This is not exactly the graph that I wanted. What I wanted was mobile phone or smartphone OS penetration. This is actually from AdMob, I believe, which is the share of their ads that are viewed on particular platforms. But I think the trend holds, which is that iPhone has been very big. It's declining a bit. Android is growing. I think BlackBerry is underrepresented in this particular slide. It's got a big market share. You guys want to talk about trends that you see in the smartphone market? Who's growing, who's declining, and how that plays into what platform you think you should be developing on?
Yeah, I think so. BlackBerry disclaimer: BlackBerry is one of our investors. Build for BlackBerry. But I think that now, especially with iPhone 4.0, sort of hinting at being closed, in terms of not maybe allowing third-party ad networks or third-party analytics software. I think Android over the next couple of years is really going to slingshot past Apple. Today, Apple has the benefit of 200, 300,000 developers and a great community, rich media ads, etc. But I really feel like Android, if you're betting for the next couple of years, is probably the platform to build on, in my opinion.
I would agree. It's interesting because we've been around in mobile since 2005. So we were around when this device called Motorola Razr ruled the market. I mean, it's funny that GetJar was mentioned earlier, but that GetJar had 100,000 apps for the Motorola Razr, and so no one in 2006 really saw past that. If you were in mobile back then, like, everything was that, and then maybe there was Nokia and Symbian and a few other things and some brew things happening, but like that J2ME world, you thought that was the world, and then 4 years later, there's this whole world and it's all iPhone, but I can guarantee you 4 years from now, it's not going to be that. And so I definitely think right now the lead horse is Android. The horse I wouldn't put out of the race at all, and not just because this is a Microsoft building, but from what I've seen of Phone 7, and it's different than Palm, right? Because if Microsoft does produce a good SDK and a good platform that makes it easy to develop on, then all of a sudden, they can throw a lot of resources at the issue, and this is a big issue. So I would say that that's a platform you should think about as well.
So I'll be the Apple fanboy. I think, certainly with the release of the iPad, you can
speak into the mic a little bit more directly.
It fits in mobile, but it's not entirely, it's not a mobile handset. It's mobile computing, and I think the fact that they sold 1 million devices in 28 days is a testament to the Apple sort of PR machine. But I think what it's doing is it's changing the way that we look at computing. I mean, we use a lot of our smartphones. We use the phone functionality, obviously, but beyond that, we tend to use a lot of the same things that we use on our computers on our phones now. And I think the trend there is, especially with iPad now in the marketplace, it's eating away at netbooks. It's also the lead horse on since Android doesn't have a competing tablet out there, not yet. And I think that's I think they're going to be a dominant player. They are the dominant player right now. So I think in the near term, I think it makes sense if you're going to go for mobile to develop for all major platforms, because that's how you're going to get your reach. But if you're trying to figure out what you're going to develop for the next 6 months, I think it's Apple.
I would agree that it really depends on the type of business that you want to build. Just in general, I believe that open ecosystems and open platforms are for your world-changing visions, and the closed ecosystems and the closed platforms are for making the money fast and putting it in your pocket. And right now, when I look at Apple, Apple is more closed than Android. There is the possibility that by building something for the Apple platform, you may run into problems, especially if you are not building a standalone application but services for other developers. You will have to jump through a lot more hoops on the Apple ecosystem than you will on the Android ecosystem. So that said, when I look at the distribution opportunities, the iPhone ecosystem is a lot like the Facebook ecosystem. It's huge. There's tons of people in it. When I look at the big iPhone applications that are using Flurry, they have an order of magnitude more users than the big Android applications that are using Flurry. So given that, if you're concentrating on the short term over getting your company out there, bootstrapping, making some money, and then gradually branching out, I would start with iPhone. If you've got an idea that's going to take some time to develop, if you're concerned that the business model may be somewhat innovative or you don't know if it's going to fly on the platform, or if you're at all worried about doing something non-standard, Android is growing quickly. It's coming out on more and more devices, and it might be a good bet to go with Android. But it really does depend on what you're looking to do.
Okay. So revenue models. There's a few revenue models for mobile apps. I guess paralleling in many ways revenue models for websites. So can you guys describe what apps are right for what revenue models, or what, if you've got an idea for an app, and it could be a subscription-based one or it could be a free one with ads in it, what's going to drive you to one particular model or another, or let's start with that. Why pick one model or another?
I've come from the school of thought where if information is accessible on the internet for free, then it should be accessible on your app for free. I kind of have mobile advertising background, so Buzz, for example, is free to the end consumer. Most location-based services like Gowalla, Brightkite, Looped, Yelp, etc., are free to the end user, and they're advertising supported. Mobile ads still have a long way to go, that's for sure. The typical banner, I think, in the past 3-4 years, even the IAB MMA compliant banners are, tracking under $1 CPM, under 1% click-through rate, so they're not effective. I think one of the good things that Apple is doing for the mobile advertising industry is with the iAd, although they could have been more creative with the name, because it's a real rich media format. It's not your typical standard static banner that's very, very small, even on the iPhone.
So what is iAd going to be exactly?
So iAd, as much as we've seen and some media buyers have looked at, is a real rich media format, which means, imagine on the web, right? You're mousing over something. So you have not flash, but animation. You have takeovers. Clicking on a banner will extend the whole screen. Movies can play as you're hovering around it. It's engaging. It's a lot more engaging than mobile banners are today. And I think that's what brands have been looking for a very long time. They're not really that excited by the standard, 180 by 200 mobile banners. So I think mobile advertising is going to change in a big way very soon. I think Apple's the first to do it. I think Android is going to come up with a standard, a competitor to iAd. And then all of a sudden, maybe 6 months from now, maybe 2 years from now, a lot more apps will be free. A lot more app developers will be making a lot more money for mobile advertising.
Okay, Dean, go ahead.
Just want to point out that Apple isn't letting anybody design iAds. Apple have to build the creative themselves. Okay, so basically they're saying every ad agency, every ad network, or every company that wants to buy iAds, we're not letting you build the creative. Apple is going to design the creative, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, that's going to change, though. They're already talking to a few agencies where agencies have to, build the creative for these units. I think in the beginning, they're definitely going to control the creative, but then if they want any scalability, they have to let brands and their agencies.
And they're also asking for a $1 million upfront
Which also means that as a developer, you're going to be making more money off of iAds than.
And I was just going to say, a brand like Coca-Cola doesn't spend less than $1 million on a media buy, right? That's one of the reasons why they haven't spent more than a couple $1 million last year in mobile, because they don't want to write the 50, 100K checks. They want to write the $10 million checks.
So what's been the most successful ad-based app so far, if anything?
I think, there's some apps that are doing like hundreds of millions of page views. You look at a company like Goji, right? Goji is free text on your iPod Touch. And, they're generating $500,000 a month in revenue, for example. And that's all through backfill. That's all through Millennial and Quattro ad networks.
So there is an opportunity here to also look beyond. And so I think that the other thing you could also think about in revenue models, it's kind of like grass is over is greener. Much like yourself, we've never actually built an app that people pay for, whether it's ourselves as Slifter or whether it's through Best Buy or some of the other apps we've developed. But what's interesting is in revenue models, there's also a lot of opportunities to be a little bit different, where it's not a 300 by 50 banner. One of the ways that Slifter actually earns money is actually embedded advertising. It's placement, right? Being able to have a product listed or a deal listed in a particular place. And I think there's actually a much bigger and broader world if we can think of the context and think of the user. I wish I had the stats for this. I don't, but I got to tell you, I believe very strongly that I'm sure Fandango gets placement dollars in their ads for where movies place on, the just released sort list. That makes a big difference in click-through rates and other things like that. If you have any experience with list views on the web and you see, top position gets X and second position gets Y, and then position down the screen barely gets touched, that's another opportunity to drive a lot of revenue that isn't just an ad banner. So I think that's one of the contexts that make a different revenue model possible.
How many downloads or how much engagement do you need in a mobile app to make money on advertising or anything significant on advertising?
Yeah, because the CPMs are pretty low. Unless you sell it to brands directly, you need, you can do the math, 20, 30 million page views a month before it's something, tangible. 20, 30 million page views means 20, 30 grand a month. So you need a very sticky app. You need something that drives a lot of impressions per user session. And that's in the current ad format.
And that's if, in that context, that's if you're doing an ad-specific app.
Right.
So I think kind of taking a step back and surveying all the revenue models. So I think, the way that when I sit down with clients and I talk about revenue models, we tend to assess, is this going to be an app that, is a niche play? Are there is there a defined set of users that you're going after that have wallets that they'll be willing to kind of, take them out and put money down on the table? Where I think building a premium app definitely makes a lot of sense. Subscription is interesting because, with in-app purchases, you can kind of roll a ad hoc subscription subscription service on the iPhone, and I know Android's working. There's ways to kind of do that on Android as well. So anytime that's a really great way of providing some value to the user through a free app, and then kind of charge them on an ongoing subscription basis. In-app purchases and virtual goods, as Greg was talking about, in games, those are definitely one of the key ways of monetizing apps, because if they are really sticky, and they keep causing users to come back, you can kind of get them to pay you over sort of a longer period of time. Advertising, again, I think echoing what these guys were saying, you have to be generating on the order, from numbers that we've pulled, and you have to be generating at least 4,000 or 5,000 downloads a day on the app store in order for you to actually, keep the lights on. And that's, if you're running a super ultralight startup and it's a couple of co-founders and that's it. So that in a nutshell is what my thoughts are.
So if your application depends on a network effect, if it gets more and more useful, the more people that have it, you got to give it away and monetize it through advertising or in-application purchases. But otherwise, I tend to tell people the buying experience is so seamless on the Apple platform, it's worth trying to sell the thing. You can always make a paid application free and try another business model with a revision. It's very hard to take an application that you've been giving away for free for a while and then make it paid. So sometimes it's worth checking out and seeing what the market will actually demand, especially when you probably don't have a good sense of how often your application is going to be used. You could find yourself with an application that's like 90% of applications and people use it for the first few days and then they never use the thing again. And in that case, the last thing on earth you want to do is try to support it through advertising, especially if you're doing anything on an impression or click gain. You're just not going to get enough impressions. So I would think very carefully about the application you're building. Is it the type of thing people are going to use a lot? Or is it something that people are going to use once in a while? If they're going to use it once in a while, consider very carefully trying to sell it and trying to see how much you'll make that way. You can always release a light version, direct people to the free version. You can always release a free version and then have the premium content be unlocked with an in-app purchase. But I feel like all these platforms have gone to the trouble of making it so easy for people to buy things that it would be foolish not to take advantage of that. It just really is so simple. So please do try that.
One thing just to add, if you do the math about a paid app, it's not bad at all. Like if you say, well, if I think I can sell 25,000 apps, even at 99 cents a month, which is a big number, but it's nowhere near the kind of number you need for an ad-based app, then all of a sudden that's 25 grand, well, that's a little less, but it's 17 grand a month, and two people can live off that and then start that way. And I think to point out Red Laser, it was brilliant of them to sell it for $1.99, then 99 cents. I mean, so.
Okay, questions about revenue models? Anybody got a question? Dean?
What ad networks are paying CPMs for mobile rather than click-through rates? Because every time I try and call a mobile ad network, they're basically not interested in doing CPM contracts.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is that, they measure things as most of the stuff is performance-based, but they'll measure it as an effective CPM. So, the reports that we get are hovering around $1, like industry standard.
But who's writing contracts today with CPM?
Yeah, I don't know anybody that is.
How good is your brand? It's totally a publisher power issue. If you're ESPN, you can go in there and you can say, I need CPM-based advertising.
But they're going directly to the brand or the agency. The ad networks are all performance-based.
Exactly.
Can you talk about subscription billing on the iPhone, what's possible, what's not, and also carrier billing?
Repeat the question first, too.
I could talk a little bit about carrier billing, because if you've released an app with, say, Sprint or AT&T back in the day, say 2006, getting anything free released with them was a huge hurdle. So everything, I don't know if your app was, but I know Slifter in 2006 with Sprint was $1.99 a month. And we didn't want it that way because we had this free vision, but it's actually not all that bad, I got to admit. And it has huge hurdles. The carriers take a bigger chunk than, say, the handset guys do. And there's a lot of hidden fees associated with development for a carrier platform, where it's nowhere near as simple as deploying an iPhone app. But on the flip side, it does match the math that some of these guys are talking about, where you may not have 100 million people using the app, but those few thousand are paying for that every time. And what's interesting is, I'll tell you one thing about a paid user: they generally rate your product higher than a free user. I don't know. Have you noticed some of that trend? Like, if someone's willing to pay for it, they're generally willing to further justify they're willing to pay for it.
Okay, Sergey?
Can I use Fandango again?
Sure.
Well, I think that's a great one, right? You're extending Fandango. You go, you register online. You got your profile. If you use their mobile app, you're using their web profile, right? It's trying to mimic the same thing. So I think they have great examples of that. And one of the funny things about it is when you look at the iPhone, Amazon is making tons of money. eBay is making tons of money. Their apps are making tons of money through this platform, and they're not paying $1 to Apple for that money, right? And you're not going to find any of those on the BlackBerry App World store because the BlackBerry App World T's and C's says they get 20% of indirect revenue. You know, and so by doing that, that's why Amazon has got a great BlackBerry app, doesn't distribute it through App World.
So one of the interesting things, if you actually have a popular web-based application, it is so hard to market applications and get application installs. But if you already have an existing web-based application, you've already got a natural venue for getting people to install the mobile application. So, and the reason why you want them to do that, at least on the iPhone platform, is because a lot of that really sweet screen real estate on the first page of iTunes is all based off of your short-term download numbers. If you want to be one of the top free apps or the top paid apps, you have to drive a lot of downloads in a short period of time. So companies that already have big popular web brands have released iPhone applications, have pushed them aggressively to their existing audience, which has got them a lot of downloads, which has got them on the top of these top free lists, which all of a sudden gets them exposed to a whole new audience. I think Pandora is a good example of this. They did this very aggressively, and that's really helped make their business, the sheer amount of usage they've got off that iTunes, and the initial seed for it was mostly driven through their web stuff. If you're starting out, if your base is small and you're looking into offering an additional mobile application, it helps. When it comes to monetization, it's hard to get people to pay for something which they're getting for free online. I haven't seen a lot of success there. So if your online service is free, your application likely is going to be too, and it's likely going to be monetized in the very same way you monetize your online application, which is likely advertising. Or it'll just be a lead generation model. I don't know your applications, so I can't speak to it. Yeah. So we have seen a lot of people build clients for a subscription service, so you can access that subscription service through mobile. We've seen people require a username and password, and therefore you already have to have an account online in order to do so, and it's just another means of reading the service. You will get ripped a new one in the reviews because a lot of people will download the thing, they'll think it's free, then they'll see they have to have an account and sign up, and they'll feel like they were ripped off. So you'll get terrible reviews, but that doesn't necessarily matter so much for that particular business.
I have a question for you. Have you ever seen anyone use an enterprise license to distribute an iPhone app for a subscription service outside of the App Store?
I haven't, but I wouldn't necessarily hear about it.
There's a question right here in the middle.
Related to that, the last question, are there any cannibalization issues or considerations if it is a free web app and you make it a free mobile app and you can monetize it as well on mobile right now? If you delay a mobile app, what are the type of things that you think about?
I think if you're monetizing web better, then maybe you don't have everything in your mobile app. So, like you mentioned, it's more of a lead gen type of tool. You get the little snacks or like a light version of your web and say, hey, for the real thing, visit us on the web.
I think if you're a publisher, then you've been in a big debate over the last 5 years as to whether these things are free or paid. And I don't think the debate's out. I don't think there's anyone, Wall Street Journal's going paid and other people are saying free.
That's Rupert Murdoch, though.
I don't know.
Okay, so let's take a look at this is, well, we're going to have to go on here. This is GetJar, which is a third-party app store, sometimes known as a DEC. And the revenue models for them, let's see. Anybody want to walk us through this slide and what we're seeing here exactly in terms of trends?
graph is getting bigger.
How about just defining the terms? Off-deck paid, on-deck paid. What's the difference there? On-deck and off-deck.
All right, so on deck, and this is, I always get into trouble with this because, I consider the Android marketplace and iTunes is totally a deck, and I don't think that, I always get into debates because I don't think just because it's not carrier controlled, it's open. And if you care to do this debate, you'll notice that there's 2,000 to 3,000 applications you can navigate to in some form on the App Store, and there's 300,000 apps that exist. So, there definitely is a deck placement there, even though there's a whole world of applications in that world. Basically, a deck is something that's easy to find. So, if you look at your feature phone, usually it's one button, whether it's called Media Mall or whatever the various decks are called. But it's an easy placement to find, and off deck is hard to find.
Okay. Marketing and distribution. So, how important is it to be on a deck? And can you, what are the differences between the different deck types? Do you want to talk about that? No?
Yeah, so from personal experience, it took Buzzed probably almost 1.5 to 2 years to get on the carrier decks. It takes a very long time. Carriers don't move extraordinarily quickly. There's a lot of paperwork involved. Relationships are key. Now, that being said, after we consummated those relationships, about half our traffic actually comes from the carriers. But it is very hard to get. It is very coveted. In today's day and age, I think the off-deck model is just a lot more efficient. It's a lot faster. If you're a good marketer, period, you can get your app out there, right? So you have a great web presence, for example, and you've optimized your web property through search engine optimization and some search engine marketing. Then, people land on your web landing page and there's a link directly to iTunes. Or you can download the BlackBerry app or the Android app right from your web page. And that's just traditional digital marketing. So SEO, SEM, there's some fun things you can do with App Circle. There's a company called Tapjoy where you can actually buy, downloads.
You play the arbitrage game with advertising. If you have a paid app, one of the benefits of a paid app is, for those of you who've done a lot of digital marketing, if you know your click rate that you're buying, and if you're spending 10 cents a click and 10 cents, and for every click you get, you can take 5 people and convert them into, that'd be great. Even if you get 2 people and convert them into a paid app, then, you could do your math and get your arbitrage rate.
Yeah, there's a company called Vlingo, or Vlingo. It's a very popular sort of voice technology, voice recognition app. And they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on arbitrage.
So if you're an ultralight startup and you have an app that you've just developed on a bootstrapping budget, should you be concerned about getting onto an app store or a deck, or and if so, which types?
I have a question. How many companies do you think without VC funding are really going to go through the process to get on the deck?
Yeah, I think the carrier deck path is probably not an option. It takes a lot of time. So it's grassroots ultralight, do some smart marketing, create a compelling app. Apple actually does a great job reaching out to compelling apps. They mentioned, listen, if there's an app for that, we'll probably find it. And they do. They've reached out to a ton of developers, some are in this room, and they feature them on commercials. So I think stick to your guns, create a really compelling app, do some smart marketing, word of mouth, grassroots, and you'll get there.
The handset or the OS specific decks, Apple App Store, for example, are much more viable for a bootstrapped startup than carrier deck, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it doesn't cost anything, right? As soon as you're done with the app, you can submit it. You're approved in a week, hopefully.
Great. So let's talk about the submission process, and particularly we touched on that for the carrier decks a little bit. So what does it take to get on the App Store or the Android Store or the BlackBerry Store?
So for the Apple Store, you just go to developer.apple.com and you enroll you just purchase the subscription. It's a year-long subscription. You can the SDK is free to download. You can develop it, but once you want to put it on the store, you need you need to be a paid developer. You go through iTunes Connect. You submit your app, your binary. They've improved they've given more transparency into the process of submitting apps, and then before what would happen is after you submit the app, it would be a black box. You wouldn't know for a week or 2 weeks where it was in the process. Now they at least let you know when it goes from sitting in the hopper to actually being reviewed, and then whether it's been rejected or accepted into the store. Also, they've gotten better with telling you, responding to you and saying this is the part of the app that I found that was screwy. You should go take a look at this and fix it and submit it back. So they've gotten better in doing that with the Apple Store.
One thing I want to say about the Apple Store is bother to read the T's and C's. I find that a lot of people who have rejections, the rejections that are like, you use trademarks that you don't have the right to use. And please be very careful using Apple's trademarks in your. And no, I'm dead serious about this. And if your application has things like sweepstakes or whatever, just make sure the terms and conditions are clear. In fact, I find that they're not really QAing. They're not going to test your app to see if everything works perfectly. They're really looking for, does it work generally, and are you violating anything specific that they're looking for?
And they provide the tools for you to sort of static analyzer and whatnot to run with the SDK. So if you can run that, that's what they're running to sort of find out what the egregious errors or problems are.
Do you want to talk about some of the horror stories that we sometimes hear about with Apple apps being rejected and why we think that is? How can you avoid it?
Yeah, spoken to a lot of developers where there's just a lot of frustration where it'll constantly get rejected, and there's no communication with Apple, right? It's an automated email, and nobody really has a path. I think in the beginning, Apple was definitely that way. I think now it's a little different, right? There's some press stories about Steve Jobs even responding himself to some developers that have just cold emailed him. But I think if anybody's having an issue, I think probably the four of us have pretty good relationships at Apple Direct. Happy to, if you have any issues, happy to, shepherd them in. But I think they're getting a lot better. But the horror stories I've heard, like, oh my God, I've been submitting for 6 months, and all I get is this stupid automated email. And I had one developer actually show up at Apple's headquarters and get escorted out. It literally an outrage. Like, I'm sick of these automated emails. I want to talk to a human. But I think they're getting better at it.
I think the other issue is that don't try to build something that Apple already has as a native app. That's just a bad idea. I mean, the Opera browser was improved, but I think that's one of the small victories in a series of a lot of other battles that app developers have lost trying to go up against trying to build replicating features that Apple has built into the iPhone or is thinking about building. So just be kind of wary of that.
Is everybody in the back here ratchet well, or no? Okay, I think probably just because you're talking one way and you get the microphones on the other side, so put the microphone in front of where you're talking when you're speaking.
Okay, sure.
Okay, questions about, why don't we go right here?
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about my experience, but this guy's the BlackBerry guy, so I'll let him. I found BlackBerry submission to be quite good. Like, I was very happy with it. The one thing is, our product got featured for a little bit on BlackBerry. We were really happy about that, and I like the submission process. The only problem is, BlackBerry App World isn't preloaded on most BlackBerries right now, and there's still that give and take between the carriers. So just because you're there, it's not the same jump effect as some of the other ones. Nokia, who Swifter has a long relationship with Nokia. I love them to death, but they're on their third app store. We've been from Download Now to Mosh to Ovi, and who knows what the app store is coming in 2 years from now. Yeah, that is a little frustrating for a developer.
The other thing about Nokia is that there's no market share in the U.S., right? So if you're from an Ovi distribution perspective, it's I think Nokia is probably under 10%. Yeah, it's very small. I mean, it's close to 40% globally, but in the U.S. it's under 10%. So if you're an app developer, I wouldn't develop for Nokia in the U.S. Yeah.
Okay, right here.
So you're talking about the different platforms. You're developing an app. Are there any strategies that if you know that you want to develop your app for multiple platforms, then what are the strategies to reduce the cost of that development for multiple platforms? What are you going to be looking for in your developers? Technical strategies, and then also other types of strategies that might be involved.
So from a sort of planning standpoint, I think a lot of planning can be done before you even sort of start cutting code. I think a lot of interesting apps that you build now will have a server backend. So I think that sort of serves as the backbone for your iPhone, your BlackBerry, your Android devices. So whatever you build, the architecture needs to be one that will work well with all three of them, because you do not want to be creating 3 separate silos for your different apps. And then when it comes to just basic sort of technical data modeling and things like that, even though there are different iPhone and Android and BlackBerry are different sort of use different languages. A lot of the conceptual thinking is the same, or it can be you can go through in a similar manner. From an execution standpoint, I think from a UI perspective, there are some elements that you can kind of retain and carry over, but largely you have to be ready for just kind of developing just native applications for all three.
What I would say here is, although we were experimenting a lot on what might be a magic bullet on this front, there really aren't that many. And if you want really solid apps on a bunch of different platforms, you have to build to those different platforms. What I will say, though, if you have if you create a highly componentized application server and client side, you will find that some objects in Android carry over to BlackBerry or vice versa because of the Java language.
When it comes to doing
Question right here.
Oh, sorry.
Just last question on that platform state. What do you guys think of platform like MobileRoti or Inkscape as a way to build one product and then try to push it out on different platforms?
I mean, I like MobileRoti as a company. They produce a good product. The product, of course, is set for something very specific, so it may not meet your needs. If it does meet your needs, if you do find that the feature set you can get through an application maker like MobileRoti works for you, they would be a relatively good person to work with.
I think Apple's put a line in the sand saying they don't want applications that run that way. So I think you just got to be careful about that. But having said that, a lot of our business is providing software to major brands and retailers because we have these independent code bases. So if you abstract the layer and think of it that way as a service provider, then that makes sense. And that's kind of like the MobileRoti model.
Cool. More questions on marketing and distribution?
I just have a quick question. When you were talking about submission of your app and it goes to developer.apple, the person doing the submission, are they looking for the person, is it the developer that actually puts together the program, or do they want it to come from the proprietor or the owner of the trademark, the company, intellectual property?
It's whoever's linked to that account, and that so if you registered your account under your name, you'd have to give that those credentials over to your developer who's submitting it, if you're not proficient in actually submitting it yourself.
If you are submitting an application of somebody else's trademarks, then you have to be very careful because, like we build applications for people who have big trademarks. The Apple will validate that this company is supposed to be submitting that app or working through that account. And oftentimes what you'll get is you'll get an application developer who gets temporary access to a company's account and just submits it under the company's account because they are very, very, very careful about, You know, I mean, think about the nightmare scenario if someone puts out an app and calls it, you know, Chase Bank, you know, and it's not Chase Bank who submits that app. So,
Okay, was there a question? George?
If I outsource development of an iPhone app, is there benefits one way or the other to registering it under my name as the owner and proprietor of that thing that I'm building? Or is it okay to just give it to the development company?
I think you should always register it under your name because the nightmare scenario again here is if your app is wildly successful, it's going to be under their certificate, their account, and to transfer it over is just an absolute nightmare. And you're going to lose your users because you would have to essentially submit a new binary under a new account.
And if there's ever a fallout with the developer, you definitely want it under your name.
yeah.
Okay.
Since you guys know the process, though, if I do outsource or hire somebody to build an app for me, is there going to be delays in the process because I'm not the contact person, let's say, for example?
No. And you just go ahead and create, sign up for your account, and then, when it's time to submit it, you just give them your credentials and say, you have 2 days or 3 days to submit it, and after that, you change your password.
I mean, that thinking is true whenever you outsource software development. I mean, you just want to know and trust who you're having build your product. I mean, that's if you can't trust who's building your product, then it doesn't really matter.
Okay, so let's go on to designing and building your app. We talked a little bit about the differences between the various platforms and why you choose one. How is building a mobile app different than building a website?
Headache, lots of it. Okay, so I see some faces in the room who have some probably a little bit more experience in some of the older software development models. So if any of you had written software, say, for a PC in 1990, right, that's what you're doing again. I mean, I hate to joke around, but if you're looking at it and you're building an app and a website, a lot of websites have scripting, and it's very different. And so, unless you're building something super simplistic, but right now, I mean, most of the iPhone development, even iPhone, right, which has a lot of like UI dev capability, they're back to writing almost code in the old standard,
What I think is interesting is it's also, like the old standard, going to follow the same trend where it went from thick client to thin client. And so we're seeing the future of these apps being literally HTML5 apps. If anybody's used Gmail in their iPhone, it looks like an app. It looks and feels like an app. And I feel like when faster bandwidth on the carrier level is around the corner, we'll have LTE, 4G later this year. You won't notice the difference in terms of speed, whether you're on the mobile web or an app. And I think the next generation, probably a year from now, we'll be talking about super thin clients on these smartphones in HTML5, for example.
Okay, questions about developing, Sergey?
There was
What's different in analytics on mobile than on the web, and what should we be keeping track of in our mobile apps?
The big technical challenge for us is imperfect connectivity. So mobile analytics on the web, it's relatively easy to get the stats in real time, whereas we have the challenge of having to get stats of application usage that occurs when the connection is bad, as it frequently is in New York, and everything else. You guys don't need to care about that. There are a number of analytics providers for mobile applications. I happen to think Flurry is the best one. I'm sort of biased. But you should absolutely look around. There's Modally, there's Localytics, Medialess has a product, Mobclicks has a product. You can kind of force Google Analytics to do it. There's a lot of options. But the absolute most important thing to do is measure. You have to be measuring. I don't care if you build it yourself. Just because it's mobile does not mean you should go out there and not understand how your application is performing, what the lifetime value of a user is, and know what's working and what's not.
Okay, we've got, let's say, one question right here. Yellow shirt.
We've been talking a lot about the application development process, contract, revenue models. My question is more geared towards from the carrier perspective. What trends do you think are you seeing or their role look like in the future? I guess to follow up on my question, when we saw the dot-com boom, everybody but AOL stood by and gave internet, for month subscription costs, where AOL tried to, provide their own content and provide their own applications. And for the most part, they missed the boat, as you saw. But do you think that, the cellular phone providers are going to do more? I mean, right now, what we seem to be doing is charging for a data plan and deciding what phones they're going to offer on their network. Do you think that that's going to look different this time around, or how do you think that the providers are going to position themselves?
I think I was at a really boring conference about this 2 weeks ago. But, I think carriers realize that they need to be more than just the dumb pipe. They constantly are trying to upsell content, constantly trying to upsell advertising. What they're good at is they're good at marketing. They're good at that customer sort of acquisition and retention. And I think they'll continue to be good at that, whether it was the landline that turned into the mobile phone, which now is turning into, WiMAX or Wi-Fi or 4G, LTE, independent of platform. I think they'll continue to meter data. So business models for 4G look like no unlimited plans, but metered plans, where, based on the bandwidth that you need on an hourly basis or a daily basis or weekly basis, you'll be charged some sort of fee, and there'll be an overage for that. And I think carriers are going to make a ton of money doing that. Will they have their own content? Probably not. I think they're going to rely on other application developers to do that.
Okay, last question. Somebody who hasn't asked before, Dario.
Have you guys seen any apps that use SMS for
Not recently. Like I remember there was a lot of SMS as the mechanism for data communication in some Symbian apps, but I think we're kind of moving away from SMS in general in that context.
The issue with SMS as a billing mechanism, premium SMS, as the carriers are still taking a huge chunk of that, right? 30-40% sometimes on premium SMS. So unless there's a third party that facilitates that, a company called Venmo allows you to do person-to-person transfers of money over SMS without the carrier taking a piece. I think if they integrate into apps, they'd be a pretty good channel.
Panel is about to end. And when it does, I want everybody to leave this room and not stick around for too long. If you want to talk to somebody, that can be done at Heartland Brewery, which is right across the street